Evening all, thank you for coming. David Marcus, a well-known figure in Ireland's literary history, once found himself trapped in a train compartment in the company of a ranting pro-IRA anti-Semitic witch. In his terrific book called Autobiography, spelt O-U-G-H-T, one of the cleverest names of an autobiography ever written, Marcus writes how he wondered, when this happened to him, how she would respond if she knew that he was one of her hated Jews. He wondered how she would respond if she knew that his grandfather escaped Russian anti-Semitism only to be driven out of Limerick by Irish anti-Semitism in 1904. And he wondered how she would respond if she knew that his mother, Fanny Marcus, had in her teens been a member of, and I forgot to do my homework before I started this evening, I was going to ask Mona for pronunciations, and I've forgotten the pronunciation. I don't want to, it's the C-U-M-A-N-N.
Cumann.
Again?
Cumann.
Cumann. That's as good as I can do it. She was a member of Cumann, the Irish Republican Women's paramilitary organisation formed in 1914. So this evening, based on research I did last year when I was writing my book called Kaleidoscope, 100 characters who helped shape the Irish Jewish community, most of the people I'll be talking about this evening feature prominently in that book of 100 pen portraits. So we're going to look at some of the members of the Irish Jewish community who were firmly in the Republican camp. Fanny Marcus was born in Limerick in 1893. She was almost 20 years older than her younger brother, Gerald Goldberg, later Lord Mayor of Cork. Those of you who know Cork might know the Goldberg Bridge, named in his honour. Fanny and Gerald were among the 13 children of Louis Goldberg, known as Laban the Red because of his red hair. And Fanny and her siblings grew up with Charles Stewart Parnell and Michael Davitt as staple daily conversation items round the dinner table. Small wonder that during the political upheavals during and after the Easter Rising of 1916, Fanny and her sister Molly became active members of Cumann. Back in Lithuania, where the family came from, and in fact, those of you who know these things would know that most of the Jews of Ireland who came over in the 1880s came from the same very small area, in fact, almost one village, one shtetl. And so the Goldbergs came from the same part of the world, and they had hung patriotic photographs of the Russian royal family on the walls of their home. Why? To put the Cossacks off the trail when they wanted to attack the family home. So in Cork, Louis emulated what his family had done in Lithuania, and he had photographs on the walls of the wedding of Prince Edward and Princess Alexandra, prominently displayed in Cork. And every time the Black and Tans raided the house, the photograph persuaded them that the Goldberg home could not possibly harbour Republican fugitives. Another Jewish woman who aligned herself squarely with Ireland's struggle for independence was the painter Estella Solomons that Edwin just mentioned. She was the sister of Bethel Solomons, the master of the Rotunda Hospital. Estella was born in 1882 into a very cultured Jewish family, and her father, Morris, immortalized in Ulysses. Some of you may remember that his name is actually mentioned. Someone is walking down the street and sees the shop front where Mr. Solomons, who was an optometrist, if I'm not mistaken. So the father, Morris, was a staunch British imperialist. Estella entered the Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, later studied in London, and she grew up in an era of great social and political change in Ireland. She became an integral part of the cultural revival, the literary revival, and the political revival sweeping the country. She was the first woman in Ireland to set up an etching press in her studio in Great Brunswick Street, now Pearse Street. Estella's circle included most of the leading figures of Ireland's burgeoning cultural revolution, and many of the visitors to her studio became her sitters. Over the years, she did portraits of rebels, republicans, artists, literary figures, including Arthur Griffiths, James Connolly, Jack B. Yeats, Count Plunkett, and others. A year after the Easter Rising, Estella, with her Jewish background, and her friend Kathleen Goodfellow, with her Quaker background, caused a stir in their respective communities when they joined the Rathmines branch of Cumann. Estella became well versed in signalling and administering first aid. She distributed arms and ammunition, which she hid under the lettuces she was growing in her parents' garden. There's an unverifiable story that when her younger sister Sophie was visiting from London with her British Army officer husband, Estella stole his uniform and gave it to the Republican movement. Estella was involved with the Prisoners' Dependents Fund, and she asked friends like John Lavery to donate paintings and other items that could be sold to raise money for the fund. And her studio became an ideal place where Republicans on the run could and did hide. Her IRA handler was a milk delivery man, a perfect cover for moving arms around the city and for gathering intelligence information. Estella called her milkman the Butterman. And if the Butterman sounds slightly familiar, it's because he was the husband of the woman later known to posterity as the Butter Woman, one of the paintings that Estella did, which changed hands last month in a Dublin auction house. Estella was unhappy with the treaty, and during the Civil War she again gave shelter to her Republican friends. However, some of her former friends, who were now on the pro-treaty side, knew that she provided a safe house, so carrying firearms had now become an offence punishable by execution, and Free State troopers frequently raided her studio. They knew what they were looking for. So in 1923, a somewhat disillusioned Estella announced that she would concentrate on her painting. Earlier, we mentioned Fanny Goldberg, later Fanny Marcus, had a younger brother, Gerald Goldberg, father, of course, of David Goldberg, who cannot be with us this evening, but a centre very eminent representative. Gerald was the Cork-born solicitor, politician and writer. He retained vivid childhood memories of the War of Independence and Civil War period, including the burning of central Cork by Crown forces, during which his family had to leave their home temporarily. In secondary school, Gerald got into trouble after he applied to be excused from Armistice Day on the grounds that the British had murdered Thomas McCurtain and Terence McSwiney. McCurtain was a founding member of the Irish Volunteers, and in April 1916, at the outset of the Rising, he commanded a force of up to 1,000 men who assembled at various locations around County Cork. He was elected in the January 1920 council elections as a Sinn Féin councillor in Cork and was chosen by his fellow councillors to be the Lord Mayor. But 2 months later, on his 36th birthday, he was shot dead in front of his wife and son by members of the RIC, the Royal Irish Constabulary. The coroner's inquest passed a verdict of willful murder against British Prime Minister Lloyd George and against certain members of the RIC. Michael Collins later arranged for RIC District Inspector Oswald Swansea, who had ordered the attack, to be fatally shot with McCurtain's revolver. McCurtain's successor to the position of Lord Mayor, Terence Joseph McSwiney, was an Irish playwright, author and politician. He was arrested by the British on charges of sedition and imprisoned in Brixton Jail, where he died in October 1920 after a hunger strike lasting 74 days. So when Gerald Goldberg, much later, becomes Lord Mayor of Cork, one of the first things he did was to commission portraits of McCurtain and McSwiney for City Hall. Gerald also acquired a long-lasting respect for fellow Corkman Michael Collins after hearing him speak at a public meeting. We started this evening talking about a train journey involving David Marcus, incidentally David Goldberg's cousin. Here is a story of another train journey, this time involving another member of the Jewish community. It's 1921, and a group of black and tans could hardly believe their luck. Bold as brass, in broad daylight, on a train travelling to Greystones, was the most wanted man in Ireland, Eamonn De Valera. They pounced on him, arrested him, and dragged him off for interrogation, only to discover that it wasn't De Valera they had arrested. The leader of Ireland's fight for independence would hardly have taken the risk of travelling so openly. No, the victim of mistaken identity, to whom apologies were reluctantly offered, was Jacob Elian. Elian may not have been De Valera, but he was sufficiently sympathetic to the Irish Republican cause that together with businessman and writer Joseph Edelstein, he founded the Judeo-Irish Home Rule Association on the 10th of September 1908. The inaugural meeting in the Mansion House attracted around 60 Jews, and the association had about 24 core members. Edelstein told the audience that the purpose of this great meeting of Jews was to resolve to support such measures as will tend to secure for the people of Ireland a full grant of self-government. So this is as early as 1908, well before the Rising. At the meeting, the names of Daniel O'Connell and Michael Davitt were recalled as great friends of the Jewish people. The meeting was also addressed by Arthur Newman, a prominent member of the Jewish community and the man responsible for the construction of the Zion schools, today's Stratford. The meeting was also addressed, three Irish Parliamentary Party MPs, William Field, Timothy Charles Harrington and Stephen Gwynn, were also present. The Judeo-Irish Home Rule Association did not last very long, but it was symptomatic of Jewish sympathy for republicanism. Elian came to the attention of John Redmond, the leader of the Nationalist Irish Parliamentary Party in the House of Commons. The party already had a token Protestant, that was Gwynn, who'd attended the meeting, and now they wanted a token Jew. But Elian turned down Redmond's offer. Elian did, however, remain active in local politics and became the treasurer of the Dublin County Liberal Association. When we think of 1913, in Dublin terms anyway, we think of the widespread lockouts and strikes. Within weeks of the Dublin tram strike that started in August, Dublin was paralysed by the lockout. Thousands were thrown out of work. At Jacob's Biscuit factory, the dispute centred on the insistence of the female employees on wearing the Irish Women's Workers' Union badge. By the 8th of September, management had locked out 310 women employees. The strike, which was organised by Labour leader Jim Larkin, showed no sign of ending. And even though both sides were eager to enter negotiations, they couldn't find anyone to be an impartial referee. And so things were at a stalemate. The employers or the unions turned down every name that was proposed. Finally, Larkin turned to Elian and asked him to take on the mediation role at the biscuit factory. The employers consented, and Elian soon hammered out an agreement that both sides could live with, and Dublin got back its biscuits. Among the Jews who openly identified with Irish yearnings to be a free nation was Michael Noyk, who was very close to Arthur Griffith. Now, given what we know about Griffith's anti-Semitic sentiments, for example, at the time of the Dreyfus affair, he wrote, I have in former years often declared that the three evil influences of the century were the pirate, the Freemason, and the Jew. So, given his well-known views, this friendship with Noik may sound surprising. Griffith's response to the 1904 Limerick boycott was equally bigoted. He described the events as simply a boycott against the usurers, even though he knew full well that most of the Jewish victims of the boycott were tradesmen, not moneylenders. Yet, Griffith would appear to have toned down his strident anti-Semitic rhetoric after meeting and befriending Noik in 1910. And Noik remained his personal solicitor until Griffith's death in 1922. Noik was an Orthodox Jew whose parents, Isaac Noik and Esther Chana Ravid, brought him from Lithuania in 1885 when he was 1 year old. Another one of those families that came over in the wave of the early 1880s. He entered Trinity College as a Sizar in, I hope I pronounced that right, good, in Hebrew, graduated in 1907 and became a solicitor. He joined Sinn Féin shortly after the Easter Rising and defended many of the volunteers who were hauled before the courts. He also was very smart in finding that the British didn't always announce who they were going to prosecute where. He had his way of finding out and would turn up in the oddest places around Ireland to defend them. And he also provided access to a number of safe houses. It was Noik who found office accommodation for Sinn Féin through his contacts in the Dublin Jewish community. Michael Collins' biographer said that Noik was the one Dublin solicitor implicitly trusted by Collins. It is well known that Michael Collins roamed around Dublin at will, despite the price on his head. I got some insight into how he managed this from the daughter of a Dublin Jew. I met her when she was quite elderly and she was living in Israel. And she told me that one Friday night in about 1920, her father was part of a group of black-clad Jews on their way home from synagogue on Friday night. They came across a British roadblock and the British soldiers sort of waved them through. As they turned the corner, the tallest man in the group of Jews removed his coat and hat, and with a cheery "thank you lads," Michael Collins continued his way through the streets of Dublin. I heard this firsthand from the little girl who remembered that. Noik was at the quayside when De Valera and other nationalists returned home from British jails, and he worked for De Valera's election campaign in the 1917 Clare East by-election. In the 1918 general election, Noik was the election agent for Constance Markovich and Sean T.O. Kelly, when both were in prison and both were overwhelmingly returned. Noik had a long record of defending Republican prisoners. He defended common Norman women hiding guns in their homes, IRA men arrested for conducting illegal marching drills, and 6 men accused of murder on Bloody Sunday in November 1920 when 11 British intelligence officers were murdered. If I'm not mistaken, that was immortalized in the movie Michael Collins, if I'm right. The trials were held in the council chamber of Dublin's City Hall. Noik spent considerable energy tracking down the secret locations where the British were holding the suspects without trial, and one of his clients was Sean McOwen. Is that how you pronounce it? Good. Sorry, I didn't do my pronunciation homework. Who led a very effective IRA flying column during the War of Independence. And when he was captured in Mullingar in March 1921, Noik defended him in an open and shut murder trial. Now, McOwen was clearly guilty and was duly sentenced to death. Michael Collins was desperate to save his life and came up with several plans to spring him from prison. One plan involved Noik, who agreed to smuggle a revolver into McOwen's cell. In the end, Collins made McOwen's release a condition for entering into negotiations with Britain, and in an exquisite irony, McOwen went on to become Irish Minister of Justice and Minister of Defence. Noik became a high-level official with the first Dáil's Department of Finance, headed by Michael Collins. He was responsible for the procurement of offices at 22 Mary Street. He also took rooms at 29 Mary Street on behalf of Dáil Éireann. He even had a special room built into the walls so that in the event of a raid, books and documents could be stored in a hurry. If a raid was suspected, someone would phone Noik and say, "Come over, Michael, they're here again," and he knew what to do. Noik rented one room that had a special hiding place for the Republican movement's gold. Most of the premises that Noik rented were under false names. And Noik may well be the only life counsellor and honorary solicitor of the Dublin Hebrew congregation to receive full military honours from the men of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA at his graveside when he died in London in 1966. An unlikely sympathiser with the Irish Republican cause was Rabbi Isaac Herzog. Some of you would know Rabbi Herzog was the first chief rabbi here. His son, Chaim Herzog, later became president of the State of Israel, and his grandson, Buji, is today the head of the Labour Party opposition in Israel. A very illustrious dynasty. Born in Poland, Rabbi Herzog was brought to Britain at the age of 9 when his father was appointed to a rabbinical position in Leeds. And Rabbi Isaac Herzog's first communal appointment was to Belfast, and it was in Belfast where Chaim Herzog was born. On his trips to Dublin, he met leaders of the Jewish community, and he accepted the job of communal rabbi in Dublin in 1919, and within a few months, the provisional Irish government, even before formal independence from Britain, appointed him as the chief rabbi of Ireland. Chaim, the son, still remembered IRA leaders on the run hiding in the rabbi's family home in Dublin. Rabbi Herzog's reputation as the Sinn Féin rabbi was only enhanced by his mastery of the Irish language. And his son Chaim also spoke fluent Irish, and when he came on a state visit to Ireland, I think in 1985, he shocked audiences around the country by speaking fluently in Irish before he did his main address. Rabbi Herzog established a close working and personal relationship with De Valera, who sent Rabbi Herzog an advance copy of the new Irish Constitution. Some of you will know that it mentions the Jewish community explicitly, an unusual thing for any constitution anywhere in the world, which explicitly guaranteed religious freedom and equal rights for Jews and other religious minorities. When Rabbi Herzog won the election to the post of Chief Rabbi of Palestine, following the death of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, an Irish Times editorial said that this reflected well upon the Irish nation and its reputation for kindness. Not quite certain what the connection is, but that's what someone wrote. However, Rabbi Herzog's election did not go down too well with the British officials in Palestine, who were suspicious of his Irish Republican sympathies. And in fact, as Chief Rabbi of Palestine, he had constant run-ins with the British authorities. He did not make life easy for them, and I don't think they made life easy for him. In the middle of Ireland's civil war between the pro- and anti-treaty parties, an Irishman brazenly walked into the Irish consular offices in New York and commandeered the premises on behalf of the Irish Republican government. I see someone in the front row nodding, and it's not from sleep. His token occupation did not last long, and he allowed himself to be removed without charge by sympathetic Irish New York policemen. The would-be occupier was Robert Briscoe. After Leopold Bloom, by far the most famous Irish Jew ever. Every time I go to the States, and even in Canada where I was recently, everyone knows his name. I don't say his name and they say, "Oh, I've heard of him." They all say, "Oh, Ireland, Dublin, Robert Briscoe, Lord Mayor." Everyone knows him. Astonishing, just astonishing. Robert was the son of Lithuanian immigrants, and he was dispatched in 1914 by his father to New York to avoid conscription into the British Army, which is really very interesting because traditionally Jews in Russia did everything they could, including literally shooting themselves in the foot, to avoid conscription into the Tsarist army. And here was a very enlightened Jew in Dublin who sent his son to America so he wouldn't be called up to fight in the British army. On Robert's return to Ireland in 1917, he shared a cabin with Eamonn Martin, Chief of Staff of Fianna Fáil, the revolutionary youth movement started by Countess Markievicz. Martin and Briscoe became firm friends, and Martin was Briscoe's best man when he married Lily Isaacs in 1919. Briscoe joined the IRA, and in 1920, Michael Collins sent his blessed Jew man, that's what he called him, to Germany to be the chief agent for procuring arms. Briscoe knew German from spending summers visiting his aunt in Berlin, and he used his business links with Germany to successfully buy arms for Ireland under the pseudonym Captain Swift. One of Briscoe's tasks in Germany was to recover a £10,000 deposit. £10,000 was a lot of money in those days. Not bad today. The volunteers had spent on a boat that had been misappropriated. Briscoe and two of his mates went to the office of the man who had taken the money and threatened to shoot him if he didn't pay up, and they received the cheque on the spot. Although Briscoe had worked closely with Michael Collins, he sided with De Valera, at whose behest Briscoe spent much of the Civil War travelling between Ireland and Germany on fundraising trips. He returned to Ireland when the Civil War ended. There is a saying, no good deed goes unpunished. We focus this evening on Irish Jews who supported the Republican cause. And I wish I could say that this support was universally reciprocated by Irish Republicans, but I can't, and I will come back to that a little later. Dr. Kevin McCarthy, who spoke here recently on Briscoe, has pointed out that the latest pension records from the Irish military archives show that there was resistance to Briscoe's application for a state pension for IRA service in the War of Independence. There were people who said he didn't deserve it. Some fellow Republicans tried to deny his contribution to Ireland's revolutionary struggle. Briscoe wrote, "I am quite aware that many would like to prove I made no contribution to the national cause." Briscoe told the Military Pensions Board to ask the Royal Navy how important he was to the Irish war effort. After all, the British had sent a circular stating that Briscoe was most elusive, his elusiveness being due to the fact that, unlike most Republicans, he has all the appearance of a gentleman. False accusations of profiteering were reinforced by an official investigation by Frank Aiken in 1926 at the behest of Sean Lemass. Briscoe complained bitterly of being subjected to accusations, insinuations, and unfair suggestions made about services given freely, readily, and without hope of reward, and at a very great personal risk. Undaunted by this sniping from his fellow Republicans, Briscoe, of course, went on to become, as we said, the first ever Jewish TD, combining his commitment to the Republican cause with his commitment to his Jewish roots, and he always insisted that his being a Hebrew did not lessen his Irishness.